Hi, this is Ryan Songalia. I'm here with Mel Gagarin. You're running for Congress in New York's 6th District here in Queens. First off, let me ask you, how are you handling the social distancing, the stay-at-home recommendations? How are you handling everything?
Yeah, I mean, so we've been following the recommendations, pretty much from the start. I mean, actually, when this all started, we were in the middle of our petitioning season, gathering signatures to get on the ballot, and we were actually the first campaign to call on the governor to either stop the process altogether or to amend the rules, just because we sort of recognized how important it was that we were taking preventative measures as soon as possible. So, we've been pretty much in a quarantine situation for a few weeks now.
hmm has there been anything that you've done to kind of keep your sanity, to pass the time while you're indoors?
Yeah, I mean, so, we've just been kind of keeping busy with the campaign and adapting to the new reality that we're living in and kind of thinking of new creative ways that we can use to, continue to engage with the public and with voters at large. And that's pretty much been consuming a lot of the time, because again, this is uncharted territory. Like the campaigning has been flipped on its head.
hmm what are some of the measures that you've used to get in front of voters now that you can't knock on doors?
Yeah, so we've been doing town halls online. We did one recently with a couple of other candidates that are also endorsed by Brand New Congress, Shania Chowdhury, Melanie DeRigo, and Lauren Ashcraft, which was a lot of fun. It was an interesting way of trying to show solidarity with other progressive candidates, that are slate mates of mine, and also be able to talk about the issues and continue to do what we can to talk to voters. I mean, for us, our campaign was very much a grassroots, on the field, door to door operation. And we're just working our best to adapt to that. And so we're also trying to think of like little creative ways that we can provide some type of relief, and also aside from information. We ended up making our phone banking operation part of a mutual aid network in Flushing to help get groceries delivered to folks that were homebound, or they just didn't feel safe going out and they're elderly and or might be immunocompromised. So a lot of adaptation and a lot of finding out ways that we can be useful in lieu of being in a campaign right now.
Do you feel that the new way that people are having to campaign, do you feel that that actually gives you a benefit, or does that hurt you as an insurgent candidate?
It's tough to say, because we are sort of in uncharted waters. I mean, for us, we've always been comfortable in the digital space, and really, as a data-driven campaign, taking advantage of all the tools that we have to reach as many folks as possible. But we again, as a grassroots campaign that relies heavily on door to door, that was certainly a strength that we have to now figure out how to reapply in the new landscape that we're dealing with.
hmm are you concerned at all that, like, June 23 nears, and we're still in a situation where it's unsafe to be gathering to vote, and the elections have to be pushed back? And if so, is there a safer way that you prefer people to vote?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for it to be mail-in ballots only at this point, or not necessarily only, but because we don't know what's going to be the case by between now and June 23rd. Perhaps by then, things could be somewhat more normal. I'm doubtful of that, and so I think it would just be smart for the state to move forward with making it, everyone can have a mail-in ballot in order to make sure that our democracy continues to function, but that we're also continuing to put public health and safety first.
At first, people were talking about the R word, recession, and now they're
hmm
talking about the D word, depression. If you were in Congress now, how would you handle what's going on, both from the economic perspective and keeping people safe?
Sure. I mean, so there's a couple of things that I think I wish were being done differently right now. For one, the idea that Congress is in session and is going to take up relief packages, in the coming months, to me, shows a fundamental problem that we've been experiencing with the status quo of our government, which is that it is extremely reactive. It puts economic concerns ahead of the public, and it's not geared to dealing with a fast-moving crisis that is fundamentally altering the face of this country. For the phase three package, there was the $1,200 means tested relief that's going to individuals that's tied to a $500 billion corporate bailout. I don't know that Washington understands what we're facing out here. And in an ideal world, what I would love to see is Congress, having sheltered in place on the Hill so that they are continuously doing standalone bills to address the changing nature of, both the economy, what's happening in the states, what the needs are. Having a better coordinated effort, putting pressure on this president to lock down the country. I mean, I think that it's folly that we are leaving it up to the states to decide, how they're going to individually respond to this crisis when, COVID-19 doesn't respect borders. It's going to keep doing what it's doing. We're starting to see hotspots pop up around the country, and that's because, we don't have a national lockdown in place. We had time to prepare. We didn't. Right. There isn't any conversations right now about, what does a national, supply chain look like? What are the logistics? Why aren't we mobilizing those folks? And if the federal government has to step in and temporarily nationalize and bring together, logistics company to figure out how we're going to troubleshoot making sure that states are getting medical supplies, that, that only essential travel, that groceries, that our farmers are taken care of so that the food supply doesn't get into trouble. Just last night I was reading a piece about what's happening in Italy, and in the beginning, we all saw the videos online of everyone coming together and singing on their balconies, but now the economic realities are starting to settle in. There's especially in marginalized communities in Italy, feeling the crunch and the fear of access to food, and these are things that, again, when you look at the trajectory of what's happening even here in New York, and what's happening in Italy, we're becoming very much following that path. And here is again an opportunity for our government to be proactive in knowing that we're going to need to have relief for folks. We need to, today is rent day, right? Why have we not canceled rent yet is beyond me. Even commercial rents, like having, small businesses get grants and loans that may be forgiven in the previous packages, a baby step, which fails to acknowledge the reality of where in the direction that we're headed. This is not something that we're going to get over in a couple of weeks. These are not going to be long-term solutions or that are going to provide the ease and sort of calm that the people need, most importantly, and that the markets are going to need, because the markets don't.
You cut out for a second when you said the markets. What was that again?
I said are collapsing under, they're feeling the pressure. They're not designed to deal with this type of crisis. Government is. And it should be the one that's stepping in and really providing the necessary relief, guidance, and coordination necessary to address it. When we talk about that $1,200 in that last stimulus package, that's not enough to cover most New Yorkers' rent for a month. And again, if you have a social security number, fine. But what happens to undocumented folk? What happens to those that are living on the margins that don't have a social security number? We cannot pretend that we are not as, we're only as strong as the most vulnerable among us. And that's where the policy focus needs to shift now, and making sure that our most vulnerable are taken care of, because they are the foundation. And the frontline workers right now are the working class folk that are always the first one on the chopping block when it comes to any type of appropriation, right? Where we put, corporate bailouts ahead of a minimum wage, of universal health care. We're seeing those bad policy decisions come home to roost.
Mm-hmm. One of the presidential candidates right now also has a very similar message. I know that you support him, Bernie Sanders. He's still running. He's trailing Biden right now in the delegates. Do you feel that there is a path forward for him to get the nomination still? And is there anything that you think that he can or should do to turn the tide?
Yeah, so I mean, I think he definitely still has a narrow path to victory. It is narrow, but it still exists, and I think that he just needs to keep doing what he's doing. I think that what we're seeing now is that all of these policies that Bernie and candidates like myself have been talking about that have been called radical, whether it's a universal basic income or Medicare for all, these are the solutions that we're turning to now in a matter of crisis because we know that they work, right? Like the veil has been lifted, and I hope that Americans are paying attention. Democracy still has to go on. I have to admit that this is an incredibly challenging time, and it's hard for folks to really pay attention to presidential politics and even congressional politics at this point. But now more than ever, it's important that folks key in and listen exactly to what Bernie is articulating to see how he's leading on this issue in a way that I think Joe Biden isn't. I mean, that he's still on TV talking about Medicare for all wouldn't solve this. That's folly. I mean, clearly it would benefit the country right now if we had Medicare for all. His comparison to Italy again, I think that was disingenuous and it was a nice political trick of verbiage. But the reality doesn't pan out, right? Like what caused the problems in Italy had nothing to do with the fact that they had universal health care. It's how they responded to the crisis in the first place. So I think that Bernie just needs to hang on and keep making his case. And look, if at some point that reality bears that he's not going to be able to walk that narrow path, then so be it. He'll have to make that decision for himself. But I think that now more than ever, policy matters. What candidates are articulating matters, and we need to rethink the way that we're approaching our politics. It's become too much theater and almost sportsman's like a sport versus really taking a hard look at what's being put forth in terms of policy solutions that affect the working class and would really be helpful for us in a situation like the one that we find ourselves in today.
I also wanted to touch on, you're running against an incumbent, Grace Meng, who is on board with some of the progressive policies that you support, like a Green New Deal, Medicare for all. How have you been able to differentiate yourself from Representative Meng?
Yeah, so I want to be clear because I think that it's really easy for folks that that follow political news or whatever to get distracted by things like support. What exactly does that mean? So let's take the Green New Deal. I think is a perfect example that my opponent supports the Green New Deal because she's a co-sponsor on a bill, right? What has she actually done to implement that? Because the Green New Deal in and of itself is just again it's a policy framework or a set of principles rather, right? Versus specific pieces of legislation that enact what those goals are and make it something practical that's implementable. We've seen someone like AOC who not only helped introduce the Green New Deal in Congress, also introduced like the Green New Deal for public housing that takes it from concept to reality. This is someone who hasn't been in office yet for 2 years. My opponent has been there for 8, and so like a co-sponsorship is nothing. That's a name on a bill. It's paperwork. And the same thing for Medicare for all. She claims to be for Medicare for all. That sounds okay, great. Most people don't pay attention, don't look at her record, right? She's funded by the health insurance industry. She's taken votes on bills that were quote unquote bipartisan, but really were lobbied for by the banking industry to help prop up health savings accounts and undercut the Affordable Care Act. And that's what matters, right? That's why I say policy matters. Look, as politicians, we can say whatever. I can promise people rainbows right now, and people that like rainbows may agree with me, but I can't formulate one out of thin air. Yeah, I have to actually show up and do the work. I have to actually put not just a bill on the floor in an election year when it's not going to make it to even a committee hearing, right? I have to actually advocate for it. I have to build coalitions around it. I have to take in stakeholders, coordinate them, and fight for this bill and build pressure to make these things happen. To go back again to Medicare for all, for an endorsement that we both went for. She says that she's from Medicare for all, and then list the 3 or 4 other things that she's also willing to accept in lieu of Medicare for all. Which, if this was 10 years ago, right, that seems like a perfectly pragmatic standpoint to take. The problem is that we did a compromise on healthcare 10 years ago. It was called the Affordable Care Act, right? Democrats got what they wanted, Republicans got a little bit about what they wanted, and then for 10 years it was slowly and surely dismantled. And now we know that, if we really want to drive down cost and make sure that everybody has healthcare can have it, Medicare for all is going to be the only way to do it. Case in point, you have someone like Pete Buttigieg during the primary saying, "Oh, Medicare for all." This sounds like a perfectly rational thing, right? If you want to keep your health insurance, go ahead and keep it, and then everybody else can take Medicare for all. Great. Now let's fast forward to the real world. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Who do you think is going to want it right now? Everyone that was uninsured, that couldn't afford private insurance, right? So what ends up happening is then the Medicare system would have been overloaded by the sick, while the healthy maintain their private insurance. Their cost isn't going to go down, and they're not going to take on any of the really sick folk that we have now. And the system would have collapsed in on itself, and then people would have turned around and go, "Oh, see, Medicare for all who want it didn't work. We need to stick with private insurance," and that's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's a failure to understand that there is no middle ground. Either we have universal coverage or we don't, because the policy goal isn't let's drive down healthcare costs. That's a great positive externality. But where our focus is what is the basic minimum baseline quality care that every American deserves? If you believe that healthcare is a human right, then the policy goal is to affirm that right. And what we need to think about when we're thinking about Medicare for all, which is not something that my opponent does, is not just thinking about the cost portion, but is thinking about how do we make sure that we have universal coverage? What's the standard of care going to be? Right? How do we ensure that our rural hospitals don't collapse, which are already in decline? How do we ensure that nursing and patient ratios are fair, that our healthcare workers are being fairly compensated, that they have the supports that they need, even beyond just salary necessities, and that's where I think that my opponent and I differ. That she can say the right things, and like right now she's doing a lot of great posturing and to come off as a progressive, even though that's the last thing anyone would have ever thought of her, right? I mean, one of the first things she did in Congress was start a bipartisan caucus. So I am getting a bit frustrated because like what's happening now is real, right? The suffering that is happening is real, and it is rooted in policy decisions that they were made. And I'm not saying that, someone is evil because they made a policy mistake. It's that you have to own it. You can't just put on the progressive costume when it's election year and not know what you're doing on it, right? Because it's either you believe in Medicare for all or you don't. You believe that healthcare is a human right or you don't. And it is a binary choice. And either you understand the policy lessons of the past 10 years of watching our healthcare system and the Affordable Care Act get chipped away, or you actively participated in it and you didn't learn those lessons, because 10 years later you wouldn't be saying, "Oh, Medicare for all or A, B, C, or D," right? Because those aren't viable options in the face of the political reality that we live in and the policy framework that we're living in.
Yes, I wanted to shift also because we both live in Queens. There are many Filipinos here in Queens. I understand that you're also part Filipino.
Yep.
What part of the Philippines is your family from, and have you been back there?
My dad's from Culacan City, and I didn't grow up with my pop, so I have actually never been to the Philippines.
Oh, okay, all right, cool. You know, when election time rolls around, this is something I've always wondered personally. You don't hear about the Filipino vote. You don't hear candidates talking about, but what are important issues that are important to Filipinos, even though there are an estimated 4 million Filipinos living in America. In my part of Queens, recently we had Bangladeshi Americans organized into a political organization. In your opinion, why haven't Filipinos done something similar? And what will it take to get Filipinos to be part of the focus that candidates look at?
I mean, I think that, we have I know there's at least one Filipino American Democratic club. I think that, and this is just from my personal anecdotal experience, like from, friends that are Filipino as well. We make up a good portion of the healthcare sector. A lot of the frontline workers that we see right now in hospitals, especially nurses, are Filipino. And so I think that this is an opportunity to really coalesce around the healthcare issues that healthcare workers are seeing on the front line and the support that they're not getting from the current healthcare system, and really be able to segment themselves. Because I mean, I think that those issues are important not just to the Filipino community, but to everyone else throughout the rest of the district and even the country as well. But I think that it helps see that community more on the front line line, because I think they're going to be the ones that are going to be facing the full brunt of those failed policy choices up until now.
Lastly, I just want to close out by asking, because I read that you're also a punk rocker. I want to ask, which punk bands were influential to you, and are there any new punk bands that you'd recommend? Asking for a friend, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's been so many different influences over the years. Anti-Flag's a big one. Green Day, Bad Religion, like those are kind of the ones that got me into it. And then obviously there's like the old school catalog, the Ramones, who are actually from our district, here in Forest Hills. And new bands, like I'm gonna be partial to friends I've played with. Divided Heaven is an old friend of mine who's actually more kind of singer-songwriter, but came out of the punk scene. And not to stick with the Heaven theme, but Fat Heaven, which is my bassist, also plays in that band. And they're a little bit more on the poppier side, but it's kind of fun and exciting music to listen to.
Well, there you have it. Mel Gagarin running for Congress in New York's 6th District, Election Day. As far as we know right now, June 23rd. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Ryan.